There's a house on a lake in rural Wisconsin that's been sold 3 times in 10 years. Every time, the price drops. Every time, it's a young couple. And every time, it's the wife who starts having trouble sleeping. This story is called The House on Heron Lake. It was posted by Miss Snoot, a woman who lived in that house for 8 months. She made it out, but the woman before her didn't. If you find yourself scrolling real estate listings, and you find a lakeside home at a price that seems too good to be true, it is. Close the tab. For this story, I'm not going to use our real names, or the real name of the lake we were on. I'm a copywriter by trade, which means I spend all day making things sound polished and appealing, and I want to be upfront that I'm not doing that here. I'm not crafting this. I'm just telling you what happened to us between May and January at a house on a lake in rural Wisconsin, and I'm telling you because I don't know what else to do with it, and because someone just moved into that house, so they don't know what's in the water. My husband, Ethan, and I got married in April of the previous year. At the time, we were 28 and 29 years old, and we'd been dating since college. The wedding was small and perfect, and we were happy, just young and in love. We'd been living in a 1-bedroom in Milwaukee that cost more than it should have, so after the wedding, we started to look for something outside the city. Ethan had taken a job doing IT support for a company in a small town, about an hour northwest, and we had been talking for months about escaping from the city. Getting some space, a place where I could work from home without hearing my neighbor's TV through the wall, and somewhere Ethan could fish on weekends without having to drive for 2 hours just to find water. The house showed up on a listing site in early May. A 3-bedroom on a lake with a dock, a big porch that faced the water. And the price was so far below what we'd budgeted that I actually triple-checked whether the listing was a scam. It wasn't. It was a real house. The price was real too. Our realtor said the previous owners had relocated and were motivated to sell. I asked why they'd left. She said they'd moved out of state for work, and that answer was good enough for me. I didn't push it. I wasn't going to be picky about this situation. The house had a porch and a dock and a lake view, and it cost less than our current rent. Oh, you better believe I wanted it badly enough to not ask any questions. I didn't want to complicate it. We moved into the place in May, and for 4 months, it was everything we'd hoped it to be. But what happened there, we never saw coming. The house was beautiful and the lake was gorgeous. Our life there was the happiest we'd ever been. The lake was the thing we loved the most. Mid-sized, you could see the far shore, maybe a 1/4 mile across, ringed by trees and a handful of other houses spread wide apart. The water was spring-fed and clear in the shallows. You could see the sandy bottom for the first 15 feet, or 20 feet even, before it dropped off into the deeper green, then into a dark that you couldn't see through. I swam in it almost every day that summer. Ethan fished off the dock in the evenings. We had a bottle of wine on the porch most nights and watched the sun go down over the water. Meanwhile, our cats would sit in the windows, watching the lake, like it was their very own personal nature documentary. The cats were named Poppy and Noodle. Poppy was a calico we'd adopted from a shelter during college. Nervous and skittish and deeply opinionated about everything. Noodle was a big orange tabby who was afraid of nothing and had once fallen asleep on top of a running vacuum cleaner. I loved them both, but Poppy was my cat, the one who slept on my chest and followed me from room to room, purring so loudly you could hear her through a closed door. We met the neighbor across the lake about a week after we moved in. His name was Dearth. I'm sorry if I'm not spelling that right, I've never heard a name like it. But he was in his 70s, and he had lived on the lake for most of his life. He came over with a jar of homemade pickles. Dearth was friendly, though a bit stoic. I noticed a lot of older rural men in Wisconsin are that way. He would talk to us about weather and fishing. but he always avoided anything personal, unless you fought him on it. He told us about the lake. He was the one that taught us it was spring-fed and very deep in the center. He said there were spots where the bottom dropped to 80 or 90 feet, allegedly, though nobody had ever measured it properly. And he said it never fully froze in the winter. Something about the springs keeping the water circulating. He said something along the lines of, "Gets a shelf of ice around the edges, but the middle stays open, black water all winter." He said it matter-of-factly. I noticed that in the weeks since we'd moved in, I'd never seen Dearth on his dock. In fact, I never saw him near the water at all. The lake was beautiful during the day, but as time went on, it became more difficult to look at after dark. I don't mean spooky, but it was like the water after sunset went flat and black, and it wasn't so easy on the eyes. At those times, there wasn't much reflection or movement. The texture was just gone. It looked less like water, and more like a void, like a big dark hole in the landscape in the shape of a lake, and what was underneath became nothing at all. I made this observation out loud to Ethan once. He said I was being overdramatic. I laughed and agreed, because it did sound silly, at least for now. I swam in the lake for the first time on our third day in the house. It was warm enough that the air had a haze to it, but the water was still holding on to spring. Ethan was on the porch with a box of kitchen stuff he'd been unpacking for an hour, without making visible progress. I walked down to the dock in my swimsuit and stood at the end looking down at the water, which was clear enough that I could see the sandy bottom 8 feet below. There were pebbles and the shadow of the dock posts, and a single bluegill hanging motionless in the shade. "You're stalling," Ethan called from the porch. "I'm preparing." "You've been preparing for 3 minutes. Just get in." So I jumped in. The cold hit me like a truck. I swear my whole body seized for a moment. I came up gasping, and I heard Ethan laughing. I splashed some water in his general direction, which fell about 40 feet short, and he raised a coffee mug he was holding in a toast. I then swam out about 30 yards, past the point where I could touch the bottom. This was where the sandy shelf gave way to deeper green. The water was extraordinary once the shock wore off, all silky and mineral clean. I floated on my back and looked at the sky. Then I rolled over and looked down. The green below me was darkening, graduating through shades I could follow with my eyes until it reached a depth where the color simply ended and there was only darkness. The lake bottom was gone or unseeable. Below my kicking feet, I couldn't even tell how far the bottom truly was. And for a second, I felt it. An almost gravitational pull. The same lurch you might get at the edge of a cliff, except inverted, dragging downward. My stomach dropped. I kicked hard toward the shallows, and that feeling broke. By the time I reached the dock, I was breathing hard and laughing at myself. "How is it?" Ethan asked. "Freezing, but amazing. Get in." "Absolutely not." "You bought a house on a lake and you refused to swim in it?" "I bought a house with a porch. The lake is your department." Well, he did get in eventually, later that week, and he yelped loud enough that Poppy bolted from the window, hiding under the bathroom sink for about half an hour. We swam together most evenings after that, at least for a while. The water warmed up degree by degree until by midsummer it felt like nothing against your skin. The line between human body and lake dissolved. There was a night in late July that I keep coming back to. We'd eaten dinner on the porch, some pasta with whatever vegetables I'd managed to keep alive in the garden, which by that point was mostly zucchini, and we'd gone through most of a bottle of wine. The sun had been down for an hour. The sky was that deep late summer blue that refuses to go fully dark. Ethan wanted to go sit on the dock, and even though I told him I had just gotten comfortable, he pulled me up by both hands, and I complained the entire way until we were sitting at the end of the dock with our feet in the water. Ethan brought the wine bottle. The lake was warm and still. The far shore was a dark line of trees, and the other houses around the lake had their porch lights on, small, gold, and distant. It felt, at that moment, like we were the only real people in the world. The lights were just set dressing. We should have done this years ago, Ethan said. He meant the move, the lake, the house. We couldn't afford it years ago. We can barely afford it now, good deal that it was. And yet, I gestured at the lake. He clinked the bottle against my glass. Behind us on the dock, a small, determined shape was picking its way towards us, with the exaggerated caution of a creature who found the outdoors personally offensive. It was Poppy. She almost never came outside. She regarded anything beyond the front door as a vast hostile conspiracy. But that night, she walked the full length of the dock, sat down directly behind me, and pressed her face into the back of my neck. Hard. The full skull headbutt that was her way of saying, "I've arrived, and you should now be grateful." I reached back and scratched under her chin. She started to purr, an absurdly loud purr that I felt rattling my collarbone. "She's jealous," Ethan said. "She's supervising," I replied. Poppy settled against my lower back, a warm, vibrating weight, and the three of us sat there at the end of the dock while the sky finished its slow fade to eventual blackness. Then the stars came out in their full glory, and the wine ran low. Ethan talked about a fishing spot one of his coworkers had mentioned. I listened partially. I felt something brush my foot under the water. A fish, probably, or a weed stirred by the current. So I pulled my feet up for a second, then put them back down and forgot about it. That was probably our happiest moment there, and I wish it had lasted. One morning late in the summer, I woke up, and I saw that the sliding glass door to the back porch was open. Just 6 inches, though. Maybe enough to let in the morning air, make the sound of the lake a little bit more clear. But there was a smell on the air, too. Something different. Ethan was already up, making some coffee, so I asked if he had opened it. He said no, and I reiterated that it was open. He said I'd probably forgotten to latch it before bed, and the wind had pushed it further open. I accepted this. The latch on that door was finicky. You had to lift and push it to get it to catch, and if you didn't do it firmly enough, it would drift open on its own. I told myself that's what happened. But I was pretty sure I remembered latching it. I recalled the sound of it clicking and the resistance and the door settling into the frame. I mean, I latched that door every night. It was a nightly ritual by then, and that door in particular was one that I focused on. But at the time, to be honest, I wasn't sure why that door demanded more of my attention. Anyway, I let it go, and I went on with my summer. Our summer. That peculiar smell became more noticeable at the start of fall. It was like this lake water smell, but concentrated and organic. Silty, low tide, like water that has rotting things in it, with a sweetness underneath that was closer to long fermented decay. Not at all pleasant. It was faint at the start. Just a whiff in the kitchen in the morning, gone before I could be sure I'd smelled it. Then stronger just a few days later, hanging in the hallway just outside the bedroom, like a pocket of bad air just wafted in. And it would get stronger still, settling into the back of the house near the sliding glass door, and no amount of cleaning could seemingly touch it. I went through the house with vinegar and baking soda, even bleach. At one point I tried this enzymatic cleaner. Sometimes the smell would retreat for a few hours, but it would come back, as if something was making it seep through our floors. Ethan smelled it sometimes too. He said something that sounded like nothing at first, but I actually looked it up, and it's a real thing. He called it the lake turning over, fall turnover, a phenomenon where the temperature change causes the deep water to rise and the surface water to sink, and the stuff at the bottom, all that decomposition and organic material, just comes up and releases gas. It happens. It produces this sulfurous, rotten smell that can carry inland. I wanted to believe that this is what it was, and for some time I did. But that turnover smell should have been outside, coming off the water. But this smell was coming inside. It was strongest at that glass door in the hallway, in the back rooms of the house. It was like something had tracked it in and left it there. Some mornings it was strong enough that Poppy wouldn't eat her breakfast in the kitchen. She would take one step in, freeze up, then back out. Poppy. Well, I need to talk to you about Poppy. She was acting strange in those weeks, and I think it was the first thing that really scared me. Sometime mid-September, Poppy stopped going near the back of the house. She'd always been a creature of routine. She would go in the kitchen in the morning, sit in the window in the living room during the day, and she'd go to the bedroom at night. Her routine took her through the hallway that ran past the sliding door a dozen times a day. But she just stopped. She'd walk to a certain point in the hallway, roughly the point where you could see the glass door at the end of the corridor, and she would sit down and stare at it. There was nothing moving around, and she wasn't looking at the lake outside, but she seemed to be looking at the door itself. She'd sit there for an hour or two at a time, perfectly still except for a low growl. It sounded scared instead of angry. Noodle, meanwhile, continued to be Noodle. He slept on the couch and ate his food, and he would sprawl in the window and watch the lake with that same benign indifference that he gave to everything. But this made me deeply uncomfortable. Why was Poppy the only other living thing in the house that seemed to be aware of what I was feeling? She and I were on the same frequency, picking up this signal that Ethan and Noodle couldn't hear, and that loneliness was worse than the fear that was rising. By the end of September, I started to hear sounds.
Planning to move? Choose Pods, the most awarded container moving company. Whether you're moving across
I would wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning, and I would hear footsteps on our dock. Heavy, soggy steps like someone walking on wood planks with bare feet after going for a swim. The dock was about 30 feet long, and the footsteps would traverse the entire length. Then they would stop. I'd lie in bed with my eyes open, listening to them. And every time, by the time I nudged Ethan awake and he was alert enough to listen, the sound would have stopped. He'd sigh and tell me it was the dock settling, that the wood was contracting in the cold night air. And the first 2 times he said this, I allowed myself to believe it. I mean, who wants to think that there was someone walking out of the lake and onto our dock every night? I like my sleep, thank you very much. By the 4th or 5th time, I stopped waking him up. I would instead lie in the dark and listen to the footsteps, come up the dock and stop at the shore end. Then I'd listen to the silence that followed. But it wasn't always a perfect silence. Sometimes I heard faint, almost inaudible, wet weight being dragged slowly across grass. One afternoon in mid-October, I walked out to the dock and I found a trail. It started at the waterline where the lake met the shore, and it went up the dock, across the yard, to the sliding glass door. The grass was pressed flat and slick in a wide path. This was no track or line, but a swath maybe 3 feet across. Something broad and heavy had moved from the water to our house. The grass was darkened and compressed. There was a faint sheen on it, a residue that smelled like the smell in that house. But the trail ended at our glass door. There were no return tracks. How is that possible? It would either have to have gone inside or gone somewhere I couldn't see or track. I called Ethan, who was at work at the time. I described what I saw. He was trying to calm me down, make me feel better. He said it could be a beaver or an otter. but I said it was 3 feet wide. He told me maybe a deer had bedded down and dragged itself. Now he was reaching. Why would a deer do that? The conversation ended, and neither of us had a good explanation. Things were getting creepy. I took some pictures of the trail. By the time Ethan had gotten home at 6, the grass had sprung back and the sheen had dried. But I had proof. I showed him the photos. He looked at them, and after a moment we looked at each other. Neither of us knew what to do, or how serious or unserious it was. But what we came up with was locking the sliding glass door with a dowel rod in the track. I did this every night from then on, and I would check it before bed, then check it again. I swear some nights I would check it a 3rd time, just to help me sleep better. At night, when I lay in the dark listening to the footsteps on the dock, and the silence that soon followed, and that sometimes audible faint wet dragging sound across the grass, well, to me, that sounded like something coming out of our waters, walking to our house, and it was doing it every night, and I swear it was getting closer. That sliding glass door was the only thing between it and me. A few nights before Halloween, I saw it. I finally saw it. I woke up sometime past 2, and I was instantly filled with dread. It was accompanied by this pulling sensation, a compulsion that bypassed my brain entirely and spoke directly to my body. It told me to get up, go to the window, and look out at the lake. I've had compulsions before, like the urge to reread an email or refresh a page. But this was different. There was no fighting it. The best way I can describe it was gravity. Like my window became the low point in the room and I began to roll towards it. So I went to the window and I looked out at the water. The moon was up, 3/4 full. The water was that flat, black, textureless nothing like I described earlier, except where the moonlight hit it. And where the moonlight landed, I could see the dock extending out over the water, pale wood on black surface. And at the end of the dock, there was something that had not been there when I went to bed. It was low and crouched on all 4s, sitting or standing on the last few planks of the dock, close to the water. And even from the bedroom window, maybe 60 feet away, I could tell it was large, wider than a human, and it looked heavy. It even made the dock look fragile underneath it. It was dark and wet. The moonlight caught moisture on its surface, and it was shifting, small stuttery movements. Its weight rocked from one limb to another, but it wasn't just adjusting position or breathing. It looked like it was trying to hold something in, like the edges of 3D models from the PS1 era. Something hung from the top of it, where the head would be, I think. Long and dark, dripping wet. It hung down to the planks of the dock. It looked like hair, extremely matted hair heavy with water, and it swayed slightly as the thing shifted its weight. It was facing the house. I stood at the window, looking at it, and I meant to look for just a few seconds, long enough to identify what I was seeing, or fail to do so. And then I would wake up Ethan, make him come to the window and see it there, so that for once he would see what I was seeing, and I would stop being alone in all this. That was the plan. A few seconds. When I looked at the clock, it was 2:47. When I woke up, I swear it was only a bit after 2. I'd been standing at that window for what must have been over 40 minutes. The time between looking at the dock and looking at the clock was, in my experience, about 15 seconds. I'd lost 40 minutes of time. This was not me just zoning out and getting absorbed in this strange sighting. It was like my time simply disappeared, or was taken. And when I looked back, the dock was empty. That thing was gone. Downstairs, the sliding glass door was open, and the dowel rod was still in the track. The door had been opened from the outside, lifted off the track and over the dowel, and sat back down. The night air was coming through now, and with it, that thick, rich, immediate smell. I knew that thing had come to our door from the dock. It had pressed itself against the opening and breathed into our house. I wondered, did it come inside? I quickly closed the door. I went upstairs and got into bed, and I covered my face. I didn't sleep. I laid there for so long listening for any noise, but everything remained quiet. In the morning, that smell was still as strong. I didn't tell Ethan about what I'd seen. Up to now, he had not been listening to me. He had not been trusting to my experiences. So I just didn't think I should tell him. But there was a thought underneath that. If he wasn't experiencing this as much as I was, then this wasn't about him, was it? Whatever was happening here, I'm pretty sure it was aimed at me.
New year, new me? Cute. But how about new year, new money?
One disturbing night, I woke up standing in the backyard in my pajamas, barefoot in the frost, facing the lake. The grass was so cold it burned, and the sky was that deep pre-dawn black, almost dawn. I was standing about halfway between the house and the shore, with my arms at my sides. No memory whatsoever of leaving my bed or walking downstairs. I was just there. I'd started to sleepwalk, and I had never once sleepwalked before in my life. I went inside, shaking so hard my teeth were clicking together. I woke up Ethan and told him. The look on his face was fear, real fear, which honestly was a relief. Maybe now he would finally take this more seriously, even if the thing he was taking seriously was my mental and physical health, rather than that lake. It happened again 8 days later. This time Ethan found me. I only know what happened because he told me afterward. He woke up at 3 a.m. in the morning, and I wasn't in bed. He went downstairs, and the sliding glass door was open. He went outside, and there I was on the dock, standing at the very end, at the edge. My toes curled over the last plank, looking down into the water. He called my name, but I did not respond. He walked out onto the dock, grabbing my arm, and apparently I screamed. A scream he described as the worst sound he'd heard me make. Just pure disorientation and terror. I collapsed against him, sobbing and shaking. I had no idea where I was, how I'd even gotten there, or how long I'd been standing over that water in the freezing dark. He installed a chain lock on the bedroom door the next day. The idea was that I couldn't sleepwalk if the chain was engaged, at least not beyond the bedroom. We latched it together every night too, both of us double-checking it. For 1 week, I stayed in bed. But the week after, I woke up on the dock again, standing at the end, barefoot and freezing, facing the water. Upstairs, the bedroom door was closed. The chain was still latched from the inside, and the sliding glass door was open. I have no way to explain how this happened. Ethan drove me to a doctor that week. The doctor explained that sleepwalking is common in adults under stress. A new house, a new environment could trigger it. She prescribed a low dose of something to help me sleep deeper. I filled the prescription and took it, and I slept through the night for 3 nights in a row. But on the 4th night, I woke back up on the dock. After that, I stopped taking the pills. They weren't keeping me inside. If anything, they might have been keeping me from waking up sooner, keeping me from fighting my way back. Late fall, Poppy disappeared. I came downstairs that morning. She wasn't in any of her usual spots. I checked the hallway where she'd taken to sitting vigil, and my bedroom. Sometimes I would find her under the bathroom sink. It was her safe spot when she was stressed out. But she wasn't there either. I searched the whole house. Then I went out into the yard. I walked down the road in both directions, calling her name. Meanwhile, Noodle sat on the porch, watching me. It kinda looked like he pitied me. 2 days later, I found Poppy. For those of you who don't like to read about or hear about harm against animals, be warned. I was standing on the dock in daylight, looking out at the lake because by that point, the lake was where I looked whenever I was missing something. And she was there, about 15 feet out from the end of the dock, floating just below the surface. She was suspended in the clear water, floating like a leaf. She was intact. Her body was whole. Her fur drifted slightly in whatever faint current the springs produced. Her eyes were open and she looked bleached almost, like the color had been drawn out of her calico patches, washed out and faded. She looked like she'd been in the water for way longer than just 2 days. I waded in to get her. The water in late November in Wisconsin is so cold. It's incredibly painful for the first few moments, then becomes this lingering ache the longer you stay in. Every step I took deeper was a step my legs were telling me not to go any further. The water reached my thighs. I was almost to Poppy. I bent down and reached for her when something gripped my ankle. It didn't feel like a fish or weeds. This felt like a hand, a strong hand. And in the half second before I ripped my leg free, I swear to you I felt fingers against my skin. Smooth and cold fingers with what felt like thick webbing between them, pressed up against my ankle as the hand squeezed. It only squeezed once, firmly, as if to get my attention. Then it let go, and I grabbed Poppy's body. I ran out of the water so fast. I was panting and crying, and I might have screamed a couple of times. When I made it to the shore, I collapsed holding my dead cat. I was shaking, and I looked down at my ankle. There was a mark where the hand had been, a white compression that would become a bruise, I could tell. The hand part I didn't tell to Ethan. I told him Poppy must have fallen off the dock at night and drowned. This part was something he believed, but the hand thing, he never would believe. Inside, I was starting to be so angry with him, like I couldn't tell him anything anymore, without some silly explanations that don't explain anything. I felt so trapped, and now my beloved Poppy was dead. I buried Poppy in the yard, near the tree line. She was wrapped in one of my sweatshirts. That night I lay in bed, listening of course to those dock footsteps and the dragging along the grass. I became angry and terrified when I heard that dragging sound approach the yard near her grave. I pulled the covers over my head, and I cried silently. After Poppy, things accelerated. Her death felt like a turning point in the worst possible way. Noodle took up Poppy's post in the hallway, staring at the sliding glass door with ears forward and body still. This should have been comforting, evidence now that Noodle felt something was wrong too. But it was not comforting. Noodle had never reacted that way before, and the fact that he was reacting that way now meant something had changed, and it meant that Noodle was in danger too. One night in early winter, I was lying in bed with the lights off. Noodle was asleep on the comforter beside me, and yet I heard Noodle meowing at the back door. That sound was coming from outside the sliding glass door, down the hall. It was distinctively Noodle's yowling cry, the cry of a cat that wants to be let in. Any cat owner knows what I'm talking about, and it sounded exactly like Noodle. But Noodle was on the bed right next to me. I could even feel the weight of him against my leg, and I could hear his slow, sleeping breaths. These cat calls went on for maybe 3 minutes, a cycle of meow, pause, meow, and each cry was close to right but not quite right. It was sort of warped at the tail end of each meow. Now that part was something that Noodle had never done. Something was standing outside my glass door in the dark, mimicking my cat, trying to lure me outside. The following morning, I found handprints on the outside of the glass, wide and thick-fingered, with smears between the fingers where webbing had dragged across the surface. I was sure of it. They were at my exact height, placed as if to anticipate where my face would be, so I would see them, so I would find them, or perhaps evidence that the thing had peered inside. I took more pictures, and I waited for Ethan to get home. By 6 o'clock, they had dried to faint smudges that could have been anything, and in Ethan's defense, the photos were blurry. When he looked at them, he looked worried but not overly concerned. This time, he didn't even say anything. That silence between us had now become a room we both lived in, but neither of us could leave. Then I started to wake up with my side of the bed damp. I initially thought it was from sweat, but this was cold, and it smelled like lake water, with that deep organic rot sweetness, and it pulled in the depression where my body lay, like someone had poured it there while I slept. Every morning I stripped the bed and washed everything, and every morning the dampness would be back, a cold patch above my pillow and along my shoulder and hip. That smell would cling to my hair and skin. I could smell it on myself throughout every day, even if I showered. I started to have dreams about that lake, and they weren't nightmares. In the dreams, the water was warm and the lake was calm. I walked in from the shore and the water rose around me, and it felt like a warm, wet hug. And it was so comforting. And I could tell in my mind in the dream that there was something waiting in the deep part of the water, down where the springs were, where the light didn't reach. Something patient. And the closer I got, the more it felt like I was going home. I would wake up from these dreams calm, and even feeling better than I had in weeks. But that calmness would soon terrify me, as I realized something was beckoning me into the water, and its calls were working.
At Walden University, get the W. Stand out the minute you start learning industry-valued skills for in-demand careers. Get the W with microcred, certificates, and field experience. Show off your career readiness and mojo before you even graduate. Get the W.
Of course, I didn't tell Ethan about the dreams. I was running out of things to even tell him. Every piece of evidence I brought to him either degraded before he could see it, or sounded in the daylight like the testimony of a woman who was falling apart. He suggested therapy. I said I didn't need it. We argued about it in the kitchen in low, exhausted voices, and the argument wasn't about therapy. It was about the fact we were now living two different realities, and neither of us could cross into the other's. And that thing in the lake, whether it knew it or not, whether it was capable of strategy or just operated on a predatory instinct, too old and too patient for me to outmaneuver, it was isolating me from the only person in the world I truly loved, the one that could have helped. I'm almost certain now that's what it was doing. It was separating me from Ethan. It was a lion separating the injured gazelle from the rest of the herd. But this thing wasn't using force or speed, but slow, steady application of pressure that made me harder and harder to believe, that made my evidence disappear, made my fear look like illness, until the distance between us was so wide, I was functionally alone, even with him sleeping next to me. It wanted me alone. It wanted me alone, and it wanted me tired, and it wanted me dreaming about warm water, and it was getting everything it wanted. Around the middle of December, I found this article. I was looking things up online, anything about the lake, like its local history or folklore or news items, anything I could find. After finding nothing useful, mainly just a couple of forum posts about lake spirits and water hauntings that read like fiction and offered no specifics, I searched instead the address of the house. After some deep digging, I found a local newspaper archive entry from 6 years earlier. A woman had walked into the lake at night and disappeared. She was the wife of the previous owner. The couple our realtor had said relocated for work. But that wasn't the case. This woman's body was never recovered. Her husband had sold the house a month later and moved to an entirely different state. The official cause was accidental drowning. The article included one quote from a neighbor, identified only as a longtime resident of the lake, who said the woman had been having trouble sleeping in the weeks before she vanished. I read through that article 3 times. Then I put my coat on and I walked around the lake to Dirth's house, and I knocked on his door. He knew why I was there. I could tell by the look on his face before I uttered a word. I think he'd been waiting for this visit, but hoped it wouldn't come. "Dirth," I said, "I need to ask you about the people who lived in our house before us." He didn't answer right away. I even watched as he looked past me to the lake. Then he stepped back from the door and said, "You'd better come in." He made coffee. I sat at his kitchen table, and he moved around the kitchen slowly. I could tell he was reluctant. He sat down across from me and set the mugs between us, and I just waited for him to speak. He wrapped both hands around his mug and stared into it. "The house has had trouble," he said finally. That's the way I'd put it. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind you're having. The Lindstroms. That was the last name of the people that were there before." You. And before the Lindstroms, there was another couple. I don't recall the name. Both times, they left fast. Those who were left. And both times, it was the wife. I felt a sting behind my sternum. "What do you mean?" Don't recall the name. Both times, they left fast. Those who were left. And both times it was the wife. I felt a sting behind my sternum. "What do you mean it was the wife?" "I mean she was the one having problems. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't stop watching the water. Her husband thought it was the isolation. Thought she was getting anxious out here by herself all day. The Lindstrom woman, she used to walk the yard at night. Her husband would find her standing at the shore in just her nightgown. She told him things were coming out of the lake. He had to take her to a doctor." "And what of the woman before her?" "I don't know the specifics. I know they left in a hurry, and I know it was winter when they did. I know that the wife was not well." "Dirth, the people here before us, the Lindstroms, the wife drowned. I found the article. I know she died." He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, he was looking at the table between us, at the coffee in his hands once more. "I'm not going to sit here and tell you what's in that lake," he said. "I've lived here my whole life, and I don't know. I'm not going to speculate, because speculation is how you start sounding mad. And sounding mad is exactly how every one of those women got dismissed." The kitchen was quiet after that. The clock was ticking on the wall. Through his window I could see the lake, flat and dark in the late afternoon, but not as dark as it could get. "You need to leave that house," he said, and I could tell he didn't want to say it. "I'm sorry. I should have said something when you moved in. Someone should have said something to you before you even bought the place. But I talked myself out of saying anything when we first met. I thought maybe this time could be different. He shook his head once. It's not different. It's never different. You need to leave. It was the first time in months another human being had confirmed what I was experiencing. I almost broke apart right there in his kitchen. But I managed to hold it together, and I thanked him. I then walked home around the lake in the late afternoon light, and I forced myself not to look at the water. That night I sat Ethan down, and I told him all of it. The hand in the water that grabbed me, the wet sheets, the fake cat sounds, handprints, dreams, and the article about the woman who walked into that lake and was never found. I told him I thought the thing in the lake had done this before, and that it chose the woman in the house, and that now it was choosing me. I said if we didn't leave, it was going to get me the way it got her. I said all of this standing in our kitchen with the lights on and the sliding glass door locked. I watched his face while I said it, and for the first time, he didn't push back on me. Something got through. Maybe the accumulation of everything, but it got through. He said okay, we could leave. He began to pack boxes with me that night. We planned to leave on a Saturday morning. Ethan took a personal day on Friday to pack, and by that evening, the house was half in boxes. The kitchen was mostly done. The living room had been stripped of anything that wasn't furniture. Our bedroom was now just a mattress and some overnight bags. Noodle was already in his carrier by the front door, which I had set up that afternoon because I wanted him to be safe. I wanted at least one living thing in this house to be ready to leave at a moment's notice. Noodle sat in his carrier and watched us through the mesh with his wide orange face, and for once, he wasn't staring at the hallway or the glass door. He was watching us, and I chose to interpret that as agreement. I should have insisted that we leave that night. I knew this at the time, and I know it now. My very soul was telling me to go now, go in the dark, get in the car and drive. But Ethan was exhausted, and the car was not fully loaded, and it seemed irrational to flee at 10 o'clock at night when we were leaving at just 7 in the morning. So I did what I'd been doing for months. I rationalized, telling myself 9 hours didn't matter, that the dowel was in the track and the chain was on the bedroom door and Ethan was with me and it would be fine. Just one more night. We went to bed at 11. I lay there on our stripped mattress with a single blanket, listening to the house. And for a change, there were no footsteps on the dock or dragging in the grass. The house was so quiet. It hadn't been that way in months. Ethan fell asleep quickly. I didn't. I lay there and watched the ceiling and waited for the sound that would surely come. I'd been conditioned to it. But I fell asleep at some point. I must have. Because the next thing I experienced was not a continuation of lying in bed, but a sharp, gasping return to consciousness. And I was not in my bed. I was in the lake. I was standing waist deep in black water in the dark, and the cold was so total and immediate that my body had not yet processed it. I was past shivering, past gasping for air, in some sort of suspended state where my nervous system was still compiling the information and had not yet delivered the full report. My feet were on the lake bottom, the silty, soft bottom that I remembered from summer, from swimming, back when this water was something I loved and I could feel the ground sloping away in front of me. The shelf, the drop-off where the shallows ended and the deep part began, where 80 or 90 feet of black water sat above springs that never stopped flowing, a bottom that no one had ever actually seen. I was standing at the edge of it. One more step, and the ground would fall away, and the water would take me. I must have sleepwalked again. I had no memory of getting out of bed or coming out here. I'd walked out while unconscious, exactly where it wanted me. The smell was everywhere, fully concentrated all around me, rising from the water, so thick I could taste it on my tongue. The lake at night was the flattest, blackest thing I'd ever seen. No reflection at all, not even moonlight. Just abyssal water in every direction, and the shore behind me. But now it seemed so impossibly far away. My house beyond it with the lights off and the doors open. I then felt it below me. Not touching me, but there in the water around my legs. A current of movement. Something was circling beneath the surface, just below me, moving slow. I could feel the water shifting against my skin as it passed. I looked down. I wish I hadn't. In the faint ambient light, I could see a shape under the surface. Broad, dark, and low, orbiting me. I saw hair fanning out behind it, or from it. Long dark hair spreading in the water like weeds. I saw a hand, too. It drifted up from the shape of it, and it came to rest against my thigh. It didn't grip, but it held on, like it had been waiting for a friend who had finally arrived. I heard Ethan screaming my name from the shore. His voice was so distant and raw. He must have woken up in bed, realizing I was gone, only to find his wife standing in a freezing lake in the dark. The exact situation of the former residence. I knew he was coming for me, to rescue me, but my legs would not respond to my will. The hand on my thigh was gentle and the water around me was cold, but that cold was fading. Or was I fading? Somewhere beneath my terror was that feeling from my dreams. That warmth, the all-encompassing comfort and relief. Something was telling me not to fight, to just let go, and the water would take me somewhere that wasn't here, but was better, and all my exhaustion, fear, and loneliness would finally end. The bottom shifted under me. The silt gave way to nothing. I was at the shelf. One more step, and the hand tightened. That thing rose toward me. I felt the water surge as it came up from below, and for a split second, it was directly in front of me, face to face, and I could feel its breath in the water against my chest, a rhythmic pulse of displaced water from something that was breathing underwater, or simulating it at least. Its other hand came up and touched my arm. I watched as its mouth opened. I felt this part more than I saw it. A widening in the dark shape, inches from my face. But it kept going past where a mouth should stop. It made a sound then, a sound that did not come from it, not even from above the water. It was in the water. It traveled through the lake and into my body. I felt it in my spine and teeth, a low vibration, and I immediately knew what it meant. Come with me. Suddenly, Ethan had me. He was in the water waist deep. His hands were under my arms, and he was hauling me backward, and that thing let go. Ethan did not overpower it. Ethan is 170 pounds, an IT guy who goes to the gym twice a week. He had not wrestled me free from something that lives in 80 feet of black water. It released me. It let me go, just like it had chosen to let go of my ankle when I got Poppy. It let me go because it decided to, and the decision was not about Ethan, and it wasn't about force. I'm only alive now because I was allowed to leave. Whatever it is, it didn't want to take me by force. It takes only if you choose to go. Ethan dragged me to the shore. I was coughing and gasping, and I was so freezing cold My muscles had stopped working properly. My legs buckled when I hit the bank. He pulled me up onto the grass and I collapsed, and so did he, next to me. We lay there on the frozen ground in the dark, soaked from the waist down. I could hear his rapid breathing, and I heard the lake behind us, still black and so very silent. Nothing followed us out. Ethan and I did not go back inside the house. He carried me to our car, placing me carefully in the passenger seat. He then wrapped me in the emergency blanket from the trunk. He went back for Noodle in her carrier by the front door, and that was it. That was all we took. He started the car, and we drove away from that house at 1:30 in the morning. The heater was on full blast, and the windows were up. The two of us live in Madison now. We're in a third-floor apartment. There are no lakes or ponds nearby. We're surrounded on all sides by concrete, asphalt, and other people. I should feel safe, right? During the day, mostly, I do. We never did go back for our things. Ethan arranged with a moving company to empty the house and put everything in storage. I told him I didn't want any of it, and he had no arguments or debates about that. The house went on the market in February. I've got no idea what the realtor told the new buyers about why we left. I imagine she said we relocated for work. Ethan and I are okay, but I choose that word carefully. We're functional, and we're together, and we're trying. The space between us that lake had created is still there, but it's smaller now. Some nights he reaches for me in the dark, and I let him hold me, and we don't talk about what happened. That's the good silence, different from what we had at the lake, and I can live with that. But I still dream about the water, even though it's less frequent. At most, once a week. In those dreams, the lake is warm and the water is calm. I walk in and something is still waiting for me in the deep part, patient as it's always been, and I can feel that enticing comfort beckoning me. I wake from those dreams calm and rested, and that still disturbs me. I've started to wonder whether the calm will always terrify me, or whether there will come a point when I finally get over it. Noodle is fine and alive. He's developed a new behavior that I have not mentioned to Ethan yet, though. He seems to stare at the drains in the house. He sits at the edge of the bathtub and watches the drain for a good 10 minutes at a time. His ears will be forward and his body still, and he's so intensely focused. It reminds me of Poppy when she would stare at the sliding glass door. He does the same thing at the kitchen sink, sitting there on the counter staring down into the drain, not moving for some time. I watch him watching it, and I tell myself it's just a cat being a cat. Cats fixate on small dark holes and creepy dark corners. They're wired to watch for prey. But then I remember I had told myself that sliding glass door would stay locked, and I was wrong then. One more thing. One night not too long ago, I woke up, and my feet were wet. I live on the 3rd floor, as I said before. There's no lake. My feet were wet, and the sheets at the bottom of the bed were damp. When I sat up and looked at the floor, there were footprints on the hard wood, leading from the front door to my side of the bed and back to the door. I haven't told Ethan, and I pray it's all in my head. I lock and deadbolt the door every night, and I always lie down in bed before going to sleep, just listening for so very long. I pray it lets go of me. I just don't know how long that's gonna be. Well, that was an emotional roller coaster. Rip Poppy, and rip Ethan's marriage. This just goes to show you, if a loved one reports some boogeyman activity, you'd better listen if you enjoy your cozy life, or it may turn into a nightmare you can't wake up from. Good night. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. You can find Unexplained Encounters episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, your favorite podcast apps, or on YouTube on the Darkness Prevails channel.